Well, you also have this.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And if you're in the here and now, welcome as well. Thank you for taking time from your valuable schedule to join me today. I have an old friend with me from New York. Doug Auld is joining me today, and we're going to talk about his musical called Hypnota. And we're going to talk about experiencer art, and we're going to talk about art, and we're going to talk about the cover up, and we're going to talk about all sorts of interesting things. Doug's a very interesting guy, and he gave me a bio. I'm going to read part of the bio here, but the part he left out is he's 70 years old, same as me, and he's still playing hockey. So I guess he's still hanging on, waiting for the New York Rangers to draft him or bring him up or something. So it's incredible that the guy could play hockey, and twice a week he plays hockey. Like, wow,
Yeah.
unreal. So Doug Ault was born in Queens, New York, and moved to New Jersey as a child. Uh, he had a love and fascination of nature and wildlife, as well as mechanics. He's the second born of a family of four, son of a car dealer. He went to trade school and studied to become with mechanics, with the intention of taking over his father's Chrysler dealership. But in his last year of high school, he began to study piano and classical music, eventually writing his own original music. After a brief time in the music industry, he took up an interest in painting after visiting the Salvador Dali Museum in Cleveland, Ohio. Primarily self-taught, Doug pursued art and painting, eventually taking continuing education courses at the Art Students League School of Visual Arts and the New York Academy in New York City. He presently lives, works, and teaches in Hoboken, New Jersey. And some of the items, and we've talked about this in previous podcasts, that he did. The first one is a series of dimorphic realism artworks. What is that, Doug?
Dimorphic realism. And hello, Grant. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a sort of a form of surrealism. It's surrealism based on realistically painted imagery that we all recognize that works its way in a surrealistic manner, an unrealistic manner. So, it,
So that's these things when you do the car, when I keep telling you to quit posting photographs. Is that what that is?
what's that?
Yeah, when you did the car with the picture of the car using,
Oh,
and I
no,
keep
no,
saying,
no.
quit posting photographs. They look like they're actual photographs.
Yeah. No, that's pretty much straight up realism. What I'm talking about is when I make all these portraits of people out of fish
Oh,
crossing over
yes,
each
yes.
other. They're surrealistic scenarios, but the imagery is realistically
Okay.
relatable.
Okay. That's the one you did Marilyn Monroe, and you did very famous people and
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff.
I did a whole series of celebrities in that system that I was trying to make comment on contrary motion, negative space. We are all made of smaller items. And even those individual fish that I depicted making Marilyn Monroe, those fish could be broken down into smaller fish, into smaller other items, and then, into infinity. So, as you and I have
Wow.
had many a conversation on the idea that we are all one, we
Yeah.
are all molecular, atomic, and vibrational.
And who came up with that? Did you get that from someone else, or did you? Because you're self-taught, right?
Yeah, I'm primarily self-taught. I started out doing art on my own. Then later on in my life, I decided let me go into the city and go to some of these art schools because I wanted to see what the academic approach was, what they were up to, what they were doing. But I never liked anyone over my shoulder. I'm much better suited to being by myself when I work. Um, but I did go in, I did a sculpting class and I did kind of see how other artists were working. And then I went back into the laboratory, so to speak. But I would say, based on that question, that there's precedence in art history. There's mosaics and Greek and Roman mosaics, where you're building images out of little chips of ceramic.
Uh-huh.
Amazing, amazing, things like that. There's the work of, then it dovetails a little bit into the work of MC Escher, where Escher had you confused about coming and going, up and down, and all this sorts of like distances. And then an artist I was very fortunate to get to know, Chuck Close, who was a very, very famous and successful artist who passed away now several years ago. He built images, he built portraits out of little mark systems. For example, he would build a huge, unbelievably realistic portrait out of his thumbprint over and over and over again. And you got away, and up close, it was just a mess of thumbprints. When you got at a distance in the gallery, it was unbelievably realistic. And I spoke to Chuck, and I remember the day I said to him, you make a high integrity image out of what you call a dumb mark. And I said, I'm going to make a dumber image out of high integrity marks. I flipped it over. And so like honeybees making a portrait, microorganisms making the portrait of Einstein. You would know Einstein's there, but it was created out of realistically painted freshwater microbes, things like that.
Wow. You did the one with cereal, right?
I did. I made humor added. I made an image of the Oswald assassination, which I actually saw live on television.
Is that right?
I did. I was like, my brother Greg and I were watching the TV, and we saw them bring Oswald out, and then boom, and we were like, oh my God, he just got shot on TV. So, but I made an image of that out of Trix cereal, where I took boxes of Trix cereal, silicone bathroom caulking. I put a little dot and then a Trix, and a dot and a Trix over and over and over again. And I made that image. It's quite compelling, and I'll send it to you so you can post it if you like.
Yeah. I was fascinated with seeing that.
Yeah.
So that leads to a question that we talk about. Like I always talk about downloads. Like you get people who are channeling, and they're in contact. They've sort of gotten out of the field. Are most artists self-taught? And when you get a thing like when you're doing with the Trix cereal, do you see that in your mind before you start, or do you start doing it and it sort of just develops as you're building away?
Well, and before I go on, I just have to tell you the title of that painting was called The Serial Killer. You can't, you can't miss that, Cereal killer. It's an outgrowth of analyzation, of problem solving, of imagery. So I like to problem solve imagery. So I see something and I see patterns, and artists look through things in a certain way. So like if I'm going to draw a portrait or in a whole figure, I'm not necessarily going to stay with the naming of the objects. So that's an eye, that's a nose, that's a forehead, that's a chin. This belongs here. I'm going to think more through the fact that there's an entire pattern going all the way through to the shoulder, and then there's something going across, and I'll analyze things in a more abstract manner. And when you analyze things in an abstract manner visually, and you put them in that way, you end up making a more realistic image than when you think you're actually paying attention to copying something, because human beings have a habit of working from a point of view of naming things. So an eye is an eye, and what's a symbol for an eye? We all draw a tear thing, right? And the song "Walk Like an Egyptian," where they have "Walk Like an Egyptian."
Yeah.
It's like a symbol, and we think in terms of symbols. Whereas to actually recreate something realistically, you need to stop thinking symbolically, and you need to look more at breaking things down of lights and darks, cools and warms, and basic shapes. So that's how I would explain that.
And we're going to get to UFOs for people who are wondering what's going on here, but we're going to get to the weird stuff. But in terms of, do you believe that you're called to do this? Do you believe this is part of a sort of a mission? Because people would say, well, Doug's got this talent. Like, where does he get this from? And people always sort of get the idea that you were sort of given this talent. Is that the way you see it? That not everybody can do this, that it's something that you either have or you don't have?
No, it's a great question, Grant, and I ask myself this all the time. something happens in your life, like I mentioned, I'm dyslexic. Now,
Yeah.
not severely dyslexic where I can't read, but you have no, people wouldn't know when I write an email how many times I'm either spell checking or flipping over a word or putting a phrase of a sentence in the front where it belongs in the back and all sorts of stuff like that. Now, was I dyslexic? I always think about this. Was I dyslexic as a child to push me in a certain direction? Or like, it's like a which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Because of that, I became an artist because I wasn't doing very well academically with like keeping up with reading. So that division that happened to me as a kid, now where does that decision making, was that given me so that I would make those decisions? Or or did I just adapt to a problem? I don't know. I really don't know. I ask myself often, went to school for auto mechanics, was supposed to take over my dad's business.
Yeah.
And, you know, my father, my mother were great people, wonderful, but old school. My father came through the Depression.
Yeah.
So, like, what are you doing? You're not going to take the car dealership. You're not going to work in the car dealership. You
Yeah.
know, that's going to, you know, and of course he wanted my safety. But my older brother, Greg, instigated the idea of us going to see the Doors play in Philadelphia. And when I saw the Doors play, and I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I wanted to come home and be a rock star, you
Yeah.
know? I bought a keyboard and I started to learn how to play the organ. And my brother Greg and I formed a band. And then from the music to the art, Salvador Dali Museum, I was off in another world. So my father it took a while, but he understood that he's got his own calling. And I don't really know where it came from. Onto the topic of UFOs, when I was a kid, all I really cared about was watching Outer Limits and Twilight Zone and every sci-fi movie I could find. I was, you know, always staring up in the sky. I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, I don't get what I am, why I'm here. And I'm sure these questions permeate a lot of people's lives. But as a creative person, I do feel when I get to the topic of Hypnota, I do feel it was given me. I feel it was a
Yeah.
mission
We'll
given
get
me.
into that, the message that you got. You're talking about music, and again, it's sort of the same sort of, because I just put out on my blog site, White House UFO blog, I put out part of the book on music, Tuned In, the Paranormal World of Music, and you get the same sort of thing. Like Tom DeLonge is dyslexic. Have you looked into this thing about dyslexia and because people would say, oh, this is a disability. But when you start looking at, say, your skills or Tom DeLonge, you start seeing, well, no, you need that. It's just something that was given to you. And if you're dyslexic, you're going to have talents in other areas rather than being able to, write a book very, with no grammatical errors or flipping words or anything like that. Have you looked into dyslexia and the people that are dyslexic? And you'll find that in the UFO field as well, that you have a lot of people who are dyslexic or have some sort of abuse issues or stuff like that, where you start looking and say, well, is this a disability or is this just something that you need to rip the filter or go through the veil and get you on the other side?
I think it's great points. I mean, we could go into that. I of course looked into dyslexia. I know that Chuck Close spoke about it, and I know that many artists have navigated their life by what they couldn't do. Chuck was not a person able to really read. Same problem. He could recognize images and faces, and he told me that when he was in school, he got to draw the projects when everybody else was writing about them. So like he took his own course and yeah, I'm aware of that. I'm aware of the fact that so for example, let's say I was really good academically and I was reading, taking
Yeah.
in pages and maybe I wouldn't have bothered being an artist. Maybe I would have been a scientist or something else. So again, it's very perplexing, but I do know that dyslexia seems to aid a person who's in the visual arts for a number of reasons.
Yeah, it'll keep that sort of the left brain out of the way in terms of
Yeah.
doing, because you're not doing a left brain thing, you're doing a right brain thing, symbolic and
Yeah. You know,
visual and all that kind of stuff.
I read a book once, briefly read a book because I'm dyslexic, but I mean, I went through a book. I went through a book called Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain many, many years
Oh
ago.
yeah, yeah, that's right.
Right. It's a very cool thing because it said, take the book, take the picture you want to read, turn it upside down, and
Yeah,
now you no longer recognize the picture, and then put your pencil down on a point and just go a little left, a little right, a little down, a little up, or whatever, and do it that way versus drawing it the way you think you should draw it from the right side up, which is left brain.
yeah,
Now that you abstractified it and it's right brain, and the drawing came out so much better when I drew it from the right brain
yeah,
perspective.
yeah,
And that really showed me that it's all a matter of evaluating, getting away from the names, getting away from the
yeah.
verbal part of it. Yeah.
Now, you say you teach in your bio. It says you teach music. Would you do you teach or art or music? I guess it'd be art you teach. Do you go
I
through?
was. Yeah.
You don't do it anymore?
No, no, I stopped teaching altogether. When my show Hypnota became my mission,
Oh yeah, yeah,
I
that's right.
pretty much dropped out of life and I just really pursued this. And to, anyone that understands anything about writing a musical,
Yeah,
it's it's like, and I recently put a notice or a blog out on my Hypnota site, and I made an analogy to climbing Mount Everest. There's an Everest movie on recently, and I was like, oh my God, who in God's name could climb a mountain like that? And then, think of the problems. You could be going up one way and you could put all this work into it, and it was the wrong route. It was a route that would prevent you from getting to the summit. Whereas if you came down and went around here, and of course, climbers have problem solved that. In music and in the musical, I never did this before. This was like cold calling, God telling me, I want you to write a musical.
yeah,
And and I did. And it was such a daunting job. I mean, I'm talking about writing the entire story, conceiving of the story, writing all the music, writing all the lyrics, putting the whole show together, in a and kind of editing it down from 135 or 40 pages down to 75, trying to get it to work the best, and then trying to put the 19 songs in it and have it run in a 2 hour and 20-minute time frame.
yeah,
So with that, I decided to leave any kind of teaching or anything. And I may return to that later on, but right now I'm just trying to see my show through, which I think that your audience, the UFO and ET audience, the audience that's interested in NDEs, UFOs, and the others, and everything beyond our, immediate vision, I think people will respond to this show. And I'm really hoping to kind of share it with everybody today and get people to,
yeah.
in their own way, if possible, help spread the word, talk to people, because I need a team of people to help me get this on stage.
Yeah, yeah, you're past the composing all the songs and
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff. Now well, maybe talk about that. But I have one more question about music, and that is, did you teach yourself self-taught music as well? And do you read music, or do you play it as most musicians do, just by ear? Like,
Well, thank you, Grant. Fortunately, I read music the way I read words. I read music, but I'm not a very good what's called sight reader. A sight reader is,
yeah,
there are these people that are great where you bring a book and you put it on the piano and they look up and they play the music. I'm
yeah,
like, I've never really been able to do that. However, I have a very, very, very good knowledge of chords, chord structure, inversions, notation. I was a piano tuner. I worked as a piano tuner for many years after getting out of the car business or the mechanics business. I took my mechanics and said, all right, I got mechanics in my hands. Where do I go? Well, let me move over to music. And what was a natural outgrowth of being interested in music was to become a piano tuner and work around pianos,
yeah,
which I did. So I rebuilt and tuned pianos. So to answer your question, I'm very, very good with knowledge of chords and composition, but I'll even grant this very song that I'll write, I'll even forget. I'll be like, all right, what was that song I wrote a month ago? Like, how do I, and fortunately with the new software, Logic Pro on my computer, it locks it all down where I can look it again and I can relearn it. But yeah, I'll create it based on my ear and following my intuition about the lyrics and everything.
Okay, now just as a little heads up for people, you got dragged in the UFO field, and maybe give me a 2 or 3 minutes on how you got dragged in the UFO field, and you're sort of at a key position in that one of the main players in the UFO thing, which sort of got you connected to me, or I think I dragged you into meeting with him. So this is part of the whole thing, and you actually may be dragged into another session with a film producer who wants to document this story, and you're the ambassador and all these other things where they want you you've been advised or you've been recommended as being part of this story. So you've got this sort of background. So tell me, to start, before we get to the Hypnota message that you got, why UFOs? How do you go from saying doing music and art to suddenly being down the rabbit hole with the rest of us when it comes to the UFO phenomenon?
I guess the start of this is, now I was born in 1953, same year as you, Grant. We're both 50.
I was January 1st of 54.
Ah, okay. I'm your senior then.
Yeah, there you go.
So, but I mean, the very first, my mom was great. The way we would get babysat during a rainy day was to sit us in front of $1 Million Movie on Channel 9. And we would have all day, we'd be watching Godzilla, or Rodan, and all these science fiction films, eating cookies and watching. And in fact, they would show Godzilla 3 times in the same day, because at the time, $1 Million Movie would repeat the
Yeah.
film. And my mother would walk in and go, "Didn't you just watch that?" I'm like, no, it's new. We're just watching it for the first time. So we got to see it. I got hooked on all things that have to do with outer space. I've got, and all the early shows like Lost in Space in the 60s, and the great 1954 movie Forbidden Planet, all this stuff Ray Bradbury, all this stuff that I got hooked in, on up to every film you could ever mention. My mind has always been on the stars and what are we doing here? And there's got to be something more than just here. There has to be something else. And so I would say it all started there. And as it went along, I'm trying to figure out what I think the internet helped a lot, because I don't think I was very much involved in ufology when it was in book form. But when the internet came out and I could see things on the internet and respond to them, that's when I started to learn to know the players and the people, and the different ufologists that were in the scenario. And it's funny how you trip along. I mean, on my Facebook page, I'm posting a lot of my whistleblower portraits.
Yeah.
And many of them, including you, I met in the ufology world. And in fact, what's his name? Thompson, the man that worked with the Navy. What was his name?
Yeah, it escapes me. I didn't really.
Yeah. I just posted him, and I can't think of his name. But he actually called me. So like I've been in interactions with a lot of people in ufology for many years, and I've learned more in ufology and forgotten more than most people will ever learn. I'm sure you feel the same way.
You did 100 guys, right? 100 whistleblowers, right?
100 whistleblowers of all different kinds of categories. In fact, way behind me on the back wall there's a bunch of them. John Lear, I spoke to him. Bob Lazar, you can see some of them back there. Not all of them whistleblowers were ufology people. They were like, a lot of them were medical or like industrial and, whatever. But I became, and I would listen to the stories and I would say, I don't know, man, why would you concoct this if it's not real? I would always ask myself, how could you stick with that story? Like, okay, you and I both, we know Chris Bledsoe, and we know Travis Walton.
Yeah.
Now, Travis Walton has adhered to his story for how long? I mean, and I would always ask myself, and I met Travis and we talked to him, and I'm like, I don't know, man, this has got to be real. I mean, I got very hooked into ufology because a lot of the aspects of it appealed to me. And it appealed to me that it was also probably out of the box and going contrary to a lot of other so-called sold paradigms that we were supposed to believe in, that actually now, when I look back, they're the ones that look faulty. A lot of historical things and this and that. But that's how I got started. And I met you, and I met Peter Robbins and a whole group of great people.
You
And
did one of Bob Bigelow, and you got some sort of reaction. What happened
yeah,
there?
he liked it. He wrote, he contacted me, or I contacted his
Assistant?
yeah, his assistant, and we went back and forth a little bit. I didn't pursue it too much. But a lot of the people that are in the field, I chose to paint and make a portrait of. And Steve Bassett told me, when you and I were in Laughlin, Nevada, Steve Bassett told me, he goes, "Oh, never sell this series, like 100 portraits." He's like, "This is going to be very famous someday." And we're creeping up on maybe that day that it will be. Unfortunately, Ron, my buddy, and who Ron Pandolfi, he interjected on my Facebook page the other day, because I put up some whistleblowers, and he's basically, these are loons and crooks and and cross-dressing people and this and that. And I had to put a smile on my face, but I told him, I said, "Ron, listen, when I painted these, I didn't know you. I'm not privy to intel.
Yeah.
I'm not privy to intel material you may know about. And so I can't, all I wanted to do was portray a group of people that got my attention. And that's what I did with the whistleblowers."
In your defense, Ron, I always point out with Ron, he talks about the loons, crooks, and worse, which we can get into, and that's fine, except if you say 90% are loons, crooks, and worse, but once you say it's 100% are loons, crooks, and worse, well, then this kind of your story sort of goes down the drain. It's like,
Yeah.
well, okay, you say that about everybody. It's like, so
Yeah.
yeah, it is. So you bringing that up, you actually sort of had a contact with him, and you sort of hit it off because his wife is into painting. Can you allowed to talk a little bit about that
Oh
with?
yeah, I'll share some stuff. First of all, much to the contrary opinion of a lot of people, when I met the Pandolfis, I was warned, you know, as if like I was going to get to their house and there's going to be hidden cameras and surveillance, and and maybe there is, I don't know. But um they have only treated me like gold ever since I met them. I mean, the nicest people. Now, I met Aaliyah Pandolfi by painting Kashmir. Do you remember I painted Kashmir's
Yeah,
portrait?
explain the painting and what it means, because that's kind of critical to the story, the way I'm interested in it.
Yeah. Well, we were both online and some on the Zoom calls back then, and I met Dan Smith.
Yeah.
And Dan Smith being in that circle, I remember I found a picture of Kashmir, and I heard enough of her story about Cheetah Land, and I decided to make a portrait of her as a gift for the Pandolfis. I liked them online and what we were talking about, and I thought I'll make a gift for them. But in the portrait, and she's just a little girl, I put several cheetahs in this scenario of like that's Kashmir in Cheetah Land. And Kashmir would talk about that she comes from Cheetah Land, and that, as if, I mean, and this is like a little child, but a child very lucid and smart and
Yeah.
awake. And
She was
you
about
know,
6 at the time, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And she asked, well, how old were we watched this video recently, and I think that was 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she was, I think now today she's 10 or she's 11, I think. So,
Yes.
run the numbers on that. But and anyway, I painted it for them and I showed it to Dan Smith, and Dan Smith was very impressed. And he passed the picture of the painting over to Aaliyah. Aaliyah and I spoke, and one thing led to another, and I became friends with them. So they invited me for Christmas the year, and I brought the painting, and I met Ron, and I mean, I think the glue of us is really through Aaliyah, because
Yeah.
we now became such good friends that we talk about, doing the dishes, how to raise a child, building things in the backyard, her gardening. She's wonderful with gardening, loves animals. And I mean, that place is great. You go over there, there's a chicken walking through the house, there's cats everywhere, there's mice, there's like, you name it, they've got it. So it's a little bit of a zoo, and I know that Ron, he mentions every now and then he wants a javelina. I don't know if you've ever heard of an animal called a javelina.
No, no.
It's like a badger or some kind of thing, but we make a joke of it. But they're very, very big on animals, animal loving, conservation. So Aaliyah's organization, Kashmir World Foundation, is involved in protecting species, and I did a little song for them recently on a video. I don't know if you saw the video of
Yeah.
their Eagle One drone. Yeah, I did the
Yeah.
music to that. And I helped them. I helped them and they helped me. And, we're there for each other as friends beyond the entire UFO topic.
Yeah. That kind of would surprise people that when, like you mentioned to me, that when you go there, you don't really talk UFOs. You're talking everything but UFOs.
Well, you know
Even
what?
though he's this key guy that may be the guy that holds the keys. He may be the top
Yeah.
guy. But
I'm probably sitting with the top guy. But you know what I learned about Ron is that I like Dan's a little bit more of like a squeaky wheel, or like he'll prod Ron, he'll prod Aaliyah,
yeah,
and Dan is in contact with Ron a lot more than I am. When I'm around Ron, it's like I've already been through the conversations with him about who's this guy, who's Hal Puthoff, who's Richard Doty, who's Kit
yeah,
Green, and I've already heard his answers.
yeah.
And
And
like so I don't want to prod him and keep asking him stuff. He also looked at all my UFO pictures, and he was impressed. He was impressed with my UFO pictures. He didn't write them off. He's like, he was looking at it, he's like looking sideways and this and that, and he was thinking about them and this and that. Um, and Ron has always said one thing to me that I've always remembered. And that is, look, he said there's a lot of garbage out there and a lot of nonsense, and it would take an amazing ability to sift through all the misinformation. And then I asked him, is the phenomenon real? And he said yes. So
that's all
that's
you
all
need.
we needed to know. I mean, you and I know if one genuine UFO landed with a being from another planet, that's all you'd need to know that that's a real event now.
Yeah.
So now it's just a numbers game. So
A question on the whistleblower. So Ron is talking that these guys are all loons, crooks, and worse, which is his expression that he uses for almost everybody. What do you say about when you do have whistleblowers? Because the other day, someone else, a film guy, came up and said, "Oh, this guy came to my door and he's got this story or whatever." And so the question always is to me is like, did you report him to the FBI? Which is what Dan Smith did to Ron Pandolfi when Ron came and started talking UFOs. And so, sort of unpack that for me about Ron seems to be the way it appears that it should be. Is that if you got classified material, you simply don't talk about it. You don't, and you get these whistleblowers who are coming and you're going like, why are you not in jail? Like how can you go and put this stuff out? And that may be what Ron says. I think he said with Gresh, he said, I bet you a cup of tea in a year, this guy will be totally
yeah.
discredited or whatever. So have you thought about that, or in terms of what he says, that he seems to be the way you would do it, is that he seems to be a very powerful guy who has answers, but he's not about to sit and tell you because you come over and help clean out the barn or whatever. He's going to tell you anything because that's part of his job is to
Yeah.
to protect classified material.
Very well said, Grant. Grant, you and I recently talked about the idea of it's curiosity on our side.
Yeah.
It's curiosity. It's not need to know.
Yeah.
It's curiosity. So, Ron is a real, I'm speaking for myself. Ron's a real soldier. He's a soldier. He's like, if he's going to keep an oath, he's keeping an oath.
Yeah.
And so, like, how does he know Doug? He may like me and we all may get along, and he may tell me something that's very, very important. And then we may have a fight and I don't see him anymore. And now I've got that information.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to blab that all over the internet. No, no, no. He's not.
Yeah.
Ron isn't like that, Ron. So I've kind of learned, I glean things, crumbs that fall off the table. I pick things up a little bit here and there, but he's pretty consistent, Ron, with like,
Yeah.
he's shown me who the techno scammers are.
Yeah.
And who makes money on this and who makes money on that. And the whole thing with Joe Firmage and how they, Hal put off and everyone brought him this bicycle contraption that turned into be an anti-gravity device and bilked him out of a ton of money. I listen and I don't make any hard, fast rules about anything. I just listen and I take everything in.
Yeah. Are you able to tell the blindfold story, which I found extremely, are you able to tell that story?
Which one is that? I may not
The
even
blindfold story where with Kashmir.
I don't know that I remember that.
Where you're going to work and she tells you to put the blindfold on.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. Yeah. She was
that sort of symbolizes that this is not a game for them. This is not, that there are actual rules.
Yeah.
Because you're like the best, maybe one of the best friends they've got. But you got to play the rules like everybody else.
And I believe I'm in the category of a loon and the crook and worse. I mean, you and I both are, Grant. I mean, most people are. But I know how to laugh. I know how to laugh at a lot of things. Ron took me to a location for his business, his job.
Yeah.
And when we were going, Kashmir was in the back seat. I was in the front right seat, and I didn't know where we were. I couldn't tell whether I was in Virginia or Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So we're riding along, but Kashmir kept saying, "Put on the blindfold." I said, "Why?" She goes, "Because you can't see where we're going." And I said, all right. And Ron was not insistent, but Kashmir was. And I said, all right, I'm going to listen to Kashmir. And I put on the blindfold and we drove to this location. And though I could never tell you where the location is, and I could tell you that it looks so inconspicuous that you'd never know what it is.
Yeah. And didn't she think you were cheating? Didn't she accuse you of cheating, peeking out of the blindfold?
Yeah, I was peeking. I was like, she goes, "Hey, stop looking under the blindfold." I said, "Come on, Kashmir, I got to see something here." So we had fun with it, but Ron brought me in there, and that was interesting. I spoke to one of the guards for a while, and we talked about a lot of different stuff. But it's I respect it all because
I think you got a trusted position. I don't, and I do the same thing as you do to Ron. Like, I don't really try to push you on ask Ron this or ask Ron that. It's like, because you're in a bad position. You're in a position where, it's got nothing to do with your friendship or anything like that. But you're in this kind of unique position. Now let's get to Hypnota and tie these people into your musical. And I guess, first of all, tell us how this came to be, the sort of the message that you got in terms of that you had to do this.
All right, great. So one morning I woke up 3:00 in the morning and I remember just sitting up and I remember saying the word Hypnota, clear as a bell, Hypnota. And I remember asking myself, did I say that? Or was that something that I brought back from dream state or something given me or something whispered to me? I didn't know. So I took note on writing it down. Had a hockey game that morning and I was smart that I wrote it down. I may have not remembered. When I got home, I read it and I remembered the whole thing and I kind of let it sit for a while. Now, as this is happening, I'm writing music. And every time I would share a song with my family or my brother or somebody, they would, or a friend, they would say, yeah, that's cool, or that's good, or I like that. But it doesn't sound like a song on the radio. It sounds like movie music or a show, a Broadway show.
Yeah.
And they got me to believe that my music sounds very Broadway-ish. Now I had my classical influences as Rachmaninoff and Chopin and Russian music I loved. I always did heavy-handed music. And so I started to meditate on the idea of, well, maybe I started to get this message that you've got this entire world here of ufology that you know all about, or as much as you could. And then you got this entire other world here of being able to compose and write music. Somehow a bell went off, and I got the instinctual message to write this music, write a musical about UFOs, and bring not a movie now. You see, this is the distinction. I didn't want to make a movie like Spielberg and like everybody else is doing, because this topic is very, very well thrashed out in the movies. I thought, what if I was to make a stage production, like a Broadway show on disclosure? It would be another wrinkle in the disclosure world. It would appeal to a tourist audience, and it would be what I would call a soft disclosure. It wouldn't be something hitting people over the head, you know? And I make an analogy very much to the great movie It's a Wizard of Oz. That It's a Wizard of Oz is like a very thought-provoking, amazing, transformative movie, but at the same time, it's entertainment. It's fun. A kid can watch it and, oh my God, that's great, and this and that and else. And in fact, in The Wizard of Oz, the tornado scene in the beginning, which is what got me hooked as a kid. I love the tornado because I love all weather scenarios. The tornado scene in The Wizard of Oz could be analogous to my UFO scene in the opening of Hypnota. It's sort of like, it doesn't dominate the show, but it sets the pace as to why everybody's going to be doing what they're doing in the show. Because I open the show with my two main characters, Nectar and Jilly, who are like, still in school, and they're going to be going home to watch a movie, and they take a shortcut through the woods because there's a bunch of bullies that always pick on them. And they go through the woods, and while they go through the woods, they have a UFO experience. And that UFO experience was inspired by the Ariel school sighting in Zimbabwe of the 63 school children, which surrounds a little bit about my story. And the characters were inspired by Nancy Tremaine. Of course, both of us know Nancy. She's great. And her amazing, amazing story, Cindy, and Nancy and Cindy are my Nectar and Jilly.
And for people that may not know Nancy actually, the way I'm portraying her now, is she is the actual first person to talk about abduction. She was 2 months before Betty and Barney Hill in 1961. She was, I think, 12 years old at the time or something like that. So, and she's quite the character. It's quite a person to pick for that. So she's from Michigan, and that's who you base the sort of the characters on, correct? Right?
I do. I don't necessarily copy anybody's experience. I just grab a little essence of Nancy's. I grab some from the Ariel School, and I grabbed some from Chris Bledsoe, who was a friend at the time, and I experienced going to his home and everything. So it's inspired by that. I mean, there's a term in show business called the McGuffin. Have you ever heard of the McGuffin?
No.
The McGuffin, I think Hitchcock said this. I don't know enough. He may have said it. The McGuffin is when something is in a show that isn't really like it seems to be about it, but it's really marginal. Like if you ever saw the movie The Birds by Alfred Hitchcock, the two little birds that are brought in the beginning of the show are the McGuffin. It's like gets your attention, but it's not really about that. And there's, I think it's very possible that my UFO sighting could be kind of the McGuffin in my show. It's Hypnota is about ETs, UFOs, the fact that this existence is real, in my opinion, from everything I've looked at in ufology and everything. It dovetails into out-of-body experiences. It dovetails into NDEs and the fact that we don't die. We're a body. We're not a body, shall I say. We're a body, but we're embodied in this vehicle that carries us around. But when we die, the body dies, the soul rises and moves out and occupies another body or takes a break or any number of other things. So after the ufology topic, I got very involved in NDEs, and actually saved me from depression because I was starting to become very depressed. And I watched probably 200 to 300 NDE videos, and they helped me see through things. So anyway, back to Hypnota. The show's designed to bring disclosure to a Broadway type or a theater audience, and it's sort of like a story about bullying, a story about young people standing up for what they know to be right, for their truth, at all odds of adversity. And the CIA characters come into the show, and this whole entire there's a death in the show. It's sad, but there's no violence, there's no cursing, there's no anything like that. It could be seen by anybody, similar to the Wizard of Oz.
Now, the way you're sort of portraying this, I've written this up in when I talk about disclosure, this drip drip disclosure, where you're fictionalizing real material, so it's not as offensive to people to watch. They can watch it. The skeptic will say, "I don't really believe this," and just watch it as entertainment, and indirectly they get the idea comes through to them. So, did you talk to, because it seems to be similar to what intelligence may be doing, where they put out stuff and it's really or Chase Brandon, if you remember back 2012, he said he wrote the book The Crystal's Conundrum. He said if you want a good read the book. If you want to learn something, read between the lines. So he's fictionalized the part of the story. Did you ever get any comment from Ron or Aaliyah about this idea about portraying UFOs in this manner, in terms of the way intelligence does it or where the government does it, or did they think that was a good idea?
Well, Aaliyah sat in with me on a table reading, so she actually read the entire play. Her and Kashmir together sat in on a table reading. Wow. With my family, my son, his wife Catherine, a few family members and everything. We had a small table reading. She's aware of the show. She's helped me work on it. I've given her opinions. I've asked her opinion on it. And I've struggled with it, as she struggled with some things she's working on, and I helped her. She helped me. So, but she thinks the songs are fantastic. She loves them. Ron be walking around cooking, because Ron is a really good cook. And I remember I was over there one day with my computer, and I played Loon's Cooks Are Worse for them. And I played Obfuscation. Ron didn't say anything, but Aaliyah was, "Doug, those are so clever. Your lyrics are so clever. Your stories are so clever." So she's a fan. She's a fan of the show. Ron doesn't say too much about it, but he's aware of what I'm doing. Now, I mean, I don't know from there on in. I mean, I don't know if my friend Ron is going to thwart its progress. I have no idea. I don't think so. I mean, that's just paranoia,
You think they would have some contacts to sort of get some guy to come in from the dark world to help you finance this thing? Because it's a big deal. Like, explain the whole production of a stage play in New York. It's a big deal. It's not some small performance that you got to go through a lot of money, a lot of people, and it's a long process. And describe where you are in the process right now.
Well, I spent close to 10 years on this, Grant, and I'm now I could say that I'm done. When I say done, it's like it's sort of like you make a painting and you've been on it for 6 months, and when you're done with the painting, there's like a whole new journey to take on that painting. Like, and again, I use climbing Mount Everest as an analogy a lot. You climb 9/10 of the way up, and that last tenth is like the amount of work of the whole mountain already. So it's like I'm at a point where I'm done. And it's funny, I just had a conversation with my wishful producer, who he's on Broadway. He's a successful producer. He's got Broadway contacts. He's interested in my show. He's not a UFO guy, but I made a very, very good explanation to him because he didn't get what UFOs were. He goes, "Well, I'm not really into UFOs and I don't really believe in them." I said, but did you ever like the movie It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart, the one that they show around the holidays? He goes, oh yeah, it's a classic. I love it. I said, do you believe in angels? Because you don't have to believe in an angel to enjoy that show.
Yeah.
And that brought it home to him. It made a lot of sense to him then. He understood. You meet the show at the terms that you're at. Now, I've never gotten any kind of advice or input about should I or shouldn't I do this based on what Ron and Aaliyah would say. Nothing like that. I just felt I'm possessed to do this.
Yeah.
I finished it. Now that I finished it, it's probably got a longer way to go. My producer who contacted me last night said, and when I say producer, he's not my producer. He's been looking at it, but it looks like he's going to be taking another show on because he's got to make money.
Yeah.
And they've got to, it's at the end of the day, it's got to be a moneymaker or you can't do it.
Yeah.
I would say producing a show like mine on Broadway is, 10 to $15 million, if not more.
Yeah.
And people are going to put that money up and they're going to want to see that show stay up. And if it closes in a month, it's a disaster. So it's not going to be easy, but it's done. And now I need to find the right producer. Now this guy that I'm talking about has no feeling or affinity for our world of ufology. So one of the reasons why I'm speaking to you and your audience and why I appreciate you doing this for me is that ufology world out there, maybe like someone like a Bob Bigelow or someone who would have some finances would say, hey, wait a minute, I want to get behind something like this. And that's what I'm looking for. So to answer your question where I'm at, I'm ready to go. All the songs are done. There's 19 songs. They could be embellished. They could be done with an orchestra. They could be done with a band. They could, in other words, those songs are the scaffolds of the ideas I want to put across. And depending on what kind of budget of money would be, what kind of production we do.
So give us your contact details and what people that you'd like to step forward. You need a producer, you need money, and what's your contact?
Okay, so my art website is dougauld.com, www.dougauld.com, and that's my art website. Let me give everybody a little secret about that website. If you put /UFO at the end of it, you'll see all my UFO pictures. That I have them hid there, so it's not to confuse it with the art.
Yeah.
So it's dougauld.com /UFO. Okay.
Yeah.
My show website for Hypnota is hypnota.com, HYPNOTTA.com. Hypnota.com, you'll see a synopsis. You'll get the idea of what the show is about. There'll be ways of contacting me. You can get on the mailing list for my blogs that I put out for news. And there's one video of the song Hypnota, which opens the second act. There's an actual song video there, but then there's 4 song samples of like 30 seconds to a minute of those songs. So they're not total songs. You get an idea of what you want to listen to. If you're interested, if anybody is interested in hearing the music or reading parts of the play, they're welcome to email me and contact me directly and say, hey, Doug, we like what this looks like. I would love it to get up in front of a small theater. That's, a small audience. That's where it belongs. It belongs getting its bugs worked out like in a 100-seat theater somewhere in a small town or whatever it is. So I'm open to taking it anywhere with the, eventual dream of getting it on Broadway. And it's a disclosure. It's like a story of youth with a UFO Trojan horse and being delivered in the show,
This is an opportunity for people. You always see people, when are we going to get the answer? And they're waiting for someone to hand it to them. Like they're the victim and we're being withheld or whatever. I think this is people's chance to step up and and help with disclosure and help move this thing down the road.
I agree, Grant. My feeling is that if it actually was a show on Broadway, Hypnota, and got the press of a story about UFO disclosure, otherworldly beings
Yeah.
crossing over, the spirit world, near-death experiences, like a whole paranormal package, but based on true stories. That's the thing. It's based on true as told stories. That's how I advertise it. I believe it would be another sector of the culture and the audience of, this country or wherever, to help move the entire story forward, to ease the stigma of it, and to kind of like maybe get our government, they say if the people would lead, the leaders would follow. Maybe if we led, the leaders would say, well, we can't hold this back any longer, and it's becoming something above board enough. People aren't freaking out that we're going to move this forward. So it's my hopes to do that.
Yeah, and I was just thinking when you were talking about the music, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's another program I've talked to you about, a documentary called The Aviary. And the aviary is this idea of the birds. These are all the high level guys with the clearances like Ron Pandolfi, Kit Green, Hal Puthoff, all these people. And there's a documentary film producer who's involved and sort of gotten the green light to do this in a fictional way. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for people like you, and they're looking for Michael, who will be talking, you and I will be talking to him tonight, where he's doing, again, like a fictional type storyline of this idea about these high level people on the UFO situation. I was thinking maybe we could talk to Michael and you could do some music for his documentary, because you would have that talent that he doesn't have, because it was recommended by Ron for him to talk to you, to drag you into this thing. So that's what I always see, that the government, that's why I called this book I'm working on right now called Drip Drip. It's, people always think they're trying to withhold everything, but they're withholding the classified material, but they're also trying to get stuff out. They're trying to encourage people to do this kind of stuff, but they're not, it's a fictionalized version that they want. They want people to raise the zeitgeist, but not to give away the classified material.
It reminds me a little similar to comedy and comedians. The only people that can tell the truth today are our comedians.
Yeah.
A comedian can come out and basically say anything he wants to say about race or gender or this or that, and it's cloaked in comedy.
Yeah.
So like, you don't have to take this too seriously, blah, 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 but they're able to say what they want to say. I think it's a very, very good system. And again, I may be just, I'm a very, very big person on intuition. I run on intuition. My intuitions tell me yes and no, and that feels right, and that passes the smell test. And I believe that my intuition has guided me up to this point on this project.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't sound like this producer that I would like to have produce the show is going to do it, because if your heart isn't into the topic in the first place, that's a tough go, and he's not going to want to wade through. He told me something last night, and it's like, it got me to cringe, but he goes, Doug, we got to Disneyfy everything. We got to Disneyfy everything.
Yeah.
Walt Disney, we got to make everything, whatever it is, pacify an audience. It's got to be entertainment. And I said to him, well, I'm not going to tell anything in the show that I can't substantiate in a integral manner.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be integral to me. Otherwise, I'm not just going to create a scenario that's ridiculous just because I can wow the audience,
Yeah, you maybe have just thought you have a similar problem to what Chris Bledsoe, when we had the meeting, this famous meeting we had in this cabin in Pennsylvania, where Tim Taylor was there and Peter Robbins was there, and these super rich business guys were there, and they were all talking to Chris about the contract. And Warner Brothers wanted to do this movie, and Chris kept saying, "Well, no, I want to control the end of the movie. I want to control the story." And they was like, no, we don't give you the control of the end of the movie. We're going to give you all this money, but you can't control the end of the movie. And I remember when it went to Tom DeLonge, Chris told me the story that Tom DeLonge had offered. And he told me how much Tom DeLonge had offered in terms of money, and it was just to make your head spin the amount of money he was offered for production money. And yet they wanted to put reptilians in the movie at the end, and Chris said, no, you're not putting reptilians in the movie. And that's the whole problem that you've got. Is true that they want this to be like Disney. It's entertainment sells, and you and I still have to in some way stick to the principle that you're trying to tell a story. Is you're not necessarily in there to make money.